Public Defenders, ICE and Deportations, AAPIs in the Crosshairs. I'm here just to say a few words of welcome before handing it off to Michael Chang, our instigator, who will introduce our speakers. So welcome. On behalf of ARC, the Asian American and Asian Diaspora Studies Program in the Department of Ethnic Studies, the Center for Race and Gender, the Institute of Government Studies, and the Institute for South Asia Studies. I want to say how grateful we are that we can come together at this time to be in communication about what is happening as regards Bay Area municipal responses to ICE actions. In general, the suspension of the rule of law and due process has meant that we have all been struggling with an incomplete picture of what is happening and are more reliant on local knowledge and diversified sources of information than ever before. And it means that it's all the more urgent that we at this time in different academic units come together to collaborate on such knowledge sharing, and that such knowledge also flows between campus and our surrounding cities. In a conversation like this, we often discover that we have more resources than we thought that we had already, and this includes the most important resource of all, the abundance of will that exists to protect the vulnerable in our midst and defend the rights of non-citizens as well as those who are citizens but can be racialized as not belonging. So with that, I'd like to introduce Michael Chang. Michael is a practicing government civil rights attorney and a previous state assistant inspector general. He also teaches on racism and U.S. law in the Department of Ethnic Studies, here from which he received his PhD. His book, Racial Politics in the Age of Transnational Citizenship, concerns the relationship between race, citizenship rights, and public policy, which is entirely on point for our conversation today. So thank you, Michael. Please come up here and you will introduce the speakers.
Thank you, Colleen. And so we're very excited today. We have a packed room here. Thank you, all the co-sponsors who have provided support for this event. Thank you for our two speakers, Manohar Raju and Ali Saidi, who are here. We're going to do a bio quickly. And for our filmographer, Lawrence Su, who's filming here, again, another bear. I'm sorry to talk behind you guys and kind of like hovering behind you. Let me figure out how I can come around. So, this is a little better. So, Ali Saidi, each of their bios are so long. I had to print it out. So I was like, how can I remember this? Ali Saidi founded and leads the immigration unit at the Office of the Public Defender for Contra Costa County. He is the director of Stand Together Contra Costa, the Rapid Response and Immigration Legal Services Program for Contra Costa County, which is administered by the Office of the Public Defender. Ali is an immigrant from Iran and a deputy public defender who specialized in the intersection between immigration law and criminal law. For over 20 years, he has been using both litigation and policy advocacy to fight for community members dehumanized by our systems of mass incarceration and mass deportation. He has taught criminal defense, pretrial advocacy at Berkeley School of Law, and he has practiced criminal defense and deportation defense throughout the Bay Area before the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. Ali received his BA from the University of California at Berkeley, and his JD from the University of Michigan Law School. Ali has served on the Contra Costa Measure X Community Advisory Board, the Contra Costa County 2020 Census Complete Count Committee. We all know how important censuses are. Census? Okay. So I just made up a word. And the core team for the launch of Contra Costa's Office of Racial Equity and Social Justice. In his free time, Ali is an active participant in immigrant rights and anti-violence advocacy efforts in our community. He is a founding member of the Contra Costa Immigrant Rights Alliance, where he serves as board director, and he is active in the Contra Costa Racial Justice Coalition and the Reimagined Public Safety Contra Costa campaign. He recently co-founded the Immigrant Action Network, which is launching a new welcoming immigrant support hub in Contra Costa County called the SAFE Center, which stands for Services and Access for Everyone Center. So Ali is obviously very devoted to the community and supporting a holistic approach to rights and advocacy, even within the criminal justice system. Next, we have Manohar Raju, the elected public defender of San Francisco, California. Leti's running for re-election soon. Is that right?
Next November.
Next November. Okay, so
2026.
actually, I don't think we can vote for you, but unless you're a San Francisco registered voter, I think you can donate. I'm not sure about that, but yeah, you could possibly. He is the elected public defender of San Francisco. He completed his undergraduate work at Columbia, then he earned a master's degree in South Asian Studies from UC Berkeley, and acquired his law degree also here at Cal. Known as a fierce litigator, Manohar has lectured on how to provide effective and skillful defense in homicide and gang cases and race-conscious representation. He believes in holistic representation, getting to know his clients, their families, and communities, as well as connecting people to re-entry opportunities. During his tenure in the San Francisco Public Defender's Office, he has launched innovative programs such as the B-Jury Program, Young Defender Program, End the Cycle Initiative, Freedom Project, College Pathway Project, and Integrity Unit. As the only elected public defender in California, he continues to grow the office's capacity to provide the highest level of representation and zealous advocacy towards more equity and humanity in the criminal legal system. Again, someone who approaches criminal justice from a holistic perspective. We have two speakers here, very excited to hear from them. And we also, next on up, we have Leti Volpp, professor at Berkeley Law and also director of the Center for, sometimes I'm getting confusing, Center for
Race and
Gender.
Yeah.
Great, right here at Berkeley Law. She's going to be sending some questions the way of these two fellows, but they're also going to be providing an intro. So we're going to give each of them like a quick 5-minute intro, and there's some slides up here for that purpose. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that generous introduction. It's really an honor to be here. Feels like I'm coming home to Berkeley, so really excited about the next hour or so we're going to spend with each other. So I was a public defender in Contra, Costa County for a number of years, and then I was recruited to San Francisco, was a line attorney in San Francisco, then the training director there, then I managed the felony attorneys. When my predecessor passed away, I was appointed by Mayor London Breed, and then subsequently elected to be the public defender. When I became the public defender, I thought it was really important for us to really redefine what our vision is. So this is it right here. You can see it fits on one page. And I want to emphasize just a couple things. First, I want to emphasize this first word, fiercely defend. And I want to be clear, it's not adequately, it's not competently, it's not effectively. Some of the words you may see in published cases. It's fiercely, and it's fiercely for a reason. We'll get to that. Defend individuals, confront state-sponsored violence, and advocate for community power. Our values are love, compassion, courage, and excellence. Our theory of change is when we fiercely defend individuals, confront state-sponsored violence, and advocate for community power, then our communities are better able to resist injustice and fight for self-determination and freedom. Our vision is a world where collective humanity is cherished, and our symbol is greater than one. And as we talk, I'll talk about the significance of that. As public defenders, we are often pivoting around this triangle that you see here. We want in our office warriors in the courtroom. And I'm going to shout out Tim Kingston, an investigator in our office who's here. But we're also counselors or facilitators. So whatever we are doing for our clients to vigorously protect their constitutional rights, at the same time we're trying to facilitate them to get to a better place consistent with their vision for themselves. And we're also change agents. I think a lot of people in this room are aware of the hyper incarceration that's been happening in this country for far too long. As public defenders, we're very close to the ground and seeing a lot of the issues and people representing them and their families that a lot of other people have labeled. So we're very close to the ground, and we have a very active, actually, function in our office in Sacramento and locally to try to change laws to empower our people. Some of the opportunities that were mentioned before, we have a college pathway project. We have that is connecting people to higher education. We were successful in pushing with others the Repair Act to eliminate youth fines. I approached the treasurer in San Francisco we initiated the Be the Jury program because oftentimes our jury system people can't serve on because they may not have the financial means. So there's an economic hardship phase where a lot of people leave the jury room. So I approached the treasurer, and we now if you would have had a hardship, you will now get paid $100 a day in San Francisco, which is increasing economic and racial diversity on juries. We also have a very vibrant immigration unit, and we'll talk more about that as the evening unfolds. And these are some of my handles, which we can get to later, because it's also really important, I think, that we spread the word about what public defense is. As it was mentioned before, I'm the only elected public defender in California, but there's an elected sheriff and there's an elected prosecutor in every county. So it's really important that we do communications to sort of message our perspective on a lot of these issues that people are talking about every day. And just by way of a little personal story, there's a lot of things that led to me becoming a public defender. But I'll start with one. My parents actually come from a farming village in South India. My father was the first in our family to finish high school. There wasn't running water in the village, caste dynamics, not many educational opportunities. But there was a village elder who truly saw his potential, encouraged his parents to allow him to leave the village and pursue higher education. And he was eventually able to immigrate to this country in the 60s, but it was because of the civil rights movement in this country, which was mainly black-led, that led to the opening of immigration that allowed us to be in this country. So I think that intersectional approach is something that I take very seriously, and solidarity between groups. While I was in law school, I was a teaching assistant in the Ethnic Studies Department at Berkeley, which I owe a lot of the work I'm doing now in courts. We're going to talk a little bit about community experts and cultural experts that I brought in is based on some of the work that I did here. So with that, I am going to kick it over to Ali.
Thank you, Manohar. So I've known Manohar a long time. We actually met each other when we were public defenders at the Contra Costa County Public Defender's Office. And one of the ways that we bonded was actually finding out that we both had ties to Berkeley, and we both had ties to the Ethnic Studies Department and the amazing work that happens here. I'm going to keep this a little brief. I don't have a PowerPoint. For me, as you heard in the bio, I myself am an immigrant from Iran, and my family came here during the Iranian Revolution. We had to kind of, restart like many families do, and very lucky to land in California. I love California. And ultimately, what my experience was like in terms of an awakening of the political realities of this country came from a global perspective originally, right? So originally, I was very much in tune with American imperialism, what the history of the Middle East was about. And actually at Cal, I studied Middle Eastern studies. That was my primary major in political economy. And so I didn't know when I was actually at Cal that I was going to end up going to law school. I wasn't interested in law school necessarily. I was, studying, having a great time, really loved being here at Cal, and not sure what I wanted to do with my life. So I'm not sure if anybody else in here is like that, but it's okay if you are. Okay, it can all turn out okay. And then after I graduated, they wanted their money back. And so I was like, uh-oh, I got to keep going to school. So just get ready for, if you have loans, get ready for that. So I was looking at graduate school to try to defer my loans, right? Because I didn't have the money and I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I didn't want, I was looking at PhD programs and public policy programs and all of this, but I was like, I don't know what subject exactly I want to study. And I felt like going into a PhD program was kind of like boxing me in. So then I looked into law school and I was like, oh, interesting. I never really thought of becoming a lawyer. But there's so many things you could do with a law degree. Maybe that's the path for me, right? Buy myself some time from paying back these loans. go figure out what I got to do, because law school is 3 years long. And really in law school is where I really took my own political education that I got very much here at Cal to the international human rights law space. We had a really great international law program at the University of Michigan. And so I got to work on refugee law at really a global scale. I was lucky enough to get to go, have a fellowship at Amnesty International's International Secretariat in London, and really saw the power of nonprofits and NGOs in making real differences in people's lives. I was just a fellow, right? So they weren't giving me a lot of crazy serious work, but the work was still so crazy and serious to me. I mean, I'd have to call government officials and say, hey, you've got somebody stuck at the border, you have to let them through. And they would actually answer the call because it was Amnesty International. And so I got really fascinated with international human rights law. And insofar as I was doing refugee stuff, I ended up signing up for the asylum law clinic at my law school. And so I had my first client, and actually he was an Iranian guy. And so they matched me with him with my busted up Farsi so that I could try to help this guy out and help him win his asylum case. And so that experience in law school that enabled me to actually work with real people that have suffered their real traumas and are now being re-traumatized as they try to navigate these really complex immigration legal systems that we had in the United States was really fascinating to me, and a big part of how I ended up becoming a public defender, because then I moved back to California because it's cold in Michigan, y'all. It's freezing. Okay, and I was like, okay, I got to go back to Cali. So I came back to California and I was like, okay, I want an international human rights law job out of law school. Well, they didn't have very many of those back then. But what I did see was an ad in a paper. That's how we used to have to get jobs. So I saw an ad about a death penalty law clerk at the public defender's office in the community that I live in. So I lived in Richmond at the time, in Contra Costa County. And I'm very much against the death penalty. I think it's a primary key human rights law issue in this country and throughout the world. And so I ended up kind of stumbling into public defense. I wasn't kind of thinking I would be a criminal defender until I got to the public defender's office and saw the incredible work that was being done and all of the incredible structural barriers and racism that is just pervasive throughout every phase of the criminal punishment system. Ultimately, I did the kind of criminal defense thing and kind of let the immigration stuff go for a while. Then eventually, I thought, as an immigrant myself, with everything that was going on, I decided that I wanted to actually do deportation defense. So I left that office and did deportation defense for about 10 years with a mixed caseload of criminal and immigration defense. So I developed an expertise at that intersection, and it was very timely, as you've seen what's happened since. So, this is after 9/11, the laws kept changing, making the immigration system shift from a civil system to a criminalizing system, and now a militaristic criminalizing system. And so I finally saw what they were doing in Alameda County here at the Public Defender's Office here, and at San Francisco Public Defender's Office that they had in-house immigration units. And our county didn't have one. So I called up my old colleagues and I said, what the heck are you doing? We need a program there. And they said, all right, well, if you come back, we can make that happen. So I came back, started our program, and I don't want to go on too long because I know we have a lot of questions, but over the years, that program has really evolved. There's a real straight through line between the criminal punishment system and the mass deportation system. People are taken from one system and pipelined into the other one. And that through line is something that we're going to talk about a lot today. And part of that is making sure that in somebody's criminal defense case, the attorneys and the clients are very aware of what the immigration impacts are going to be. So that was something that wasn't really happening with defense lawyers for many, many years, including the years that I started as a public defender. So that's a key part of what we do as immigration public defenders, but we can do so much more. And so nowadays, there's a lot happening. Our team has grown So we have, multiple lawyers, multiple legal assistants, social workers, public information officers, and we're not only doing those Padilla consultations, telling people what the impacts of their criminal cases would be, but we're also actually representing people in their deportation proceedings. Because the thing about being a public defender, you've all seen TV, right? So you've seen like somebody gets arrested and they get read their Miranda rights, right? And one of their Miranda rights is you have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided to you at no cost, right? When I went from the public defender's office into immigration court for the first time, and I was like, wait a second. We have all the same systems of kind of structural racism and barriers here, yet you don't have yet in this country a constitutionally recognized right to have an attorney appointed for you if you cannot afford one. So in order to fill the gap, public defender offices are a natural source to do that. And that's what we do in Contra Costa, in San Francisco, and in Alameda counties. And we're going to talk more to you today about some of the different programs that we have. As Mike mentioned, there's a lot of stuff going on, and so I'm happy to answer any questions about that, but I want to get to our conversation, so I'll stop there, but I'm really glad to be here at Berkeley. I used to do a lot of work in this building, so some of it's traumatic, but it's great to be here.
So the call of this program is, how have aggressive militarized ICE deportation tactics impacted the rights of AAPI and marginalized communities? How are public defenders mounting legal challenges to these tactics? And so I think there are questions about, what's going on right now, as well as questions about how your offices were set up previous to the current moment. Ali mentioned Padilla, which was a Supreme Court decision in 2010, which basically newly articulated this idea, which was if a criminal defense attorney realized their client was a non-citizen and didn't actually address the question of immigration consequences for a guilty plea, that it could possibly be ineffective assistance of counsel, because there's so many deportation removal consequences to criminal conduct. So I'm sort of torn between talking about how you guys are set up. I also would love to jump into this question of, we've all seen what's going on in Los Angeles, in New York City, in Portland, now in Charlotte. And I wonder if you could talk simultaneously about how your offices are set up to address this intersection of criminal defense, immigration defense, and also about what's going on the ground in San Francisco and Contra Costa right now.
Well, let me start with more broadly the intersection of criminal defense and immigration defense. And you talked about this case Padilla, which makes it that is ineffective assistance of counsel if you do not advise someone of the immigration consequences. While that's important, prior to that, I mean, you should be, if you're representing someone in front of you and you know that they may get deported as a result of this plea, you shouldn't need a case to tell you that you have to advise them of those consequences, right? Because that's what this is about. This, if your value is love and compassion, then you should be aware of what those consequences are. Having said that, having that law now in place enables us to build out immigration units. A lot of times previously we would call up an organization like Immigration IRLC or some of the other ones in the Bay Area. Now we have in-house people to advise on the immigration consequences of a particular plea. Now, one thing that is crucial is the barriers to getting justice in the criminal system are tremendous. The first one being pretrial detention, where so many people plead to something not because the elements have been proven, not because there's been a hearing, but because the district attorney, who objected at the initial arraignment to being released, 9 days later, when there's time for a hearing and they have to do some work, all of a sudden offer you a deal, just plead to this and you can go home, right? It's a very coercive tactic because you don't have to take this deal, but you will remain in a cage until a later point. And that's this manufacturing of pleas is something that happens in every single day in every courtroom across this country. Pretrial detention is one big issue. The other is overcharging. Depending on, I've seen cases that if you're in certain neighborhoods, it might be calling the parents and saying, hey, there was an issue. In other neighborhoods, it might be a misdemeanor. Other places, it's a strike, like a felony strike. Some of you may have studied or heard about the 3 strikes laws in California. Same incident can be dealt with in very different ways by the prosecutors. And the last one is trial tax, which is judges and district attorneys trying to intimidate our clients. So you don't have to take this offer of 3 months, but just so you know, if you get convicted, you might get 4 or 5 years. So it's up to you. You have a right to a trial, though. So for that reason, it's super important that defenders are not just effective, but fierce. So a lot of the work we do is getting in there early and really empowering clients on the front end. We have a requirement you have to see your client within 48 hours of the initial court appearance. And in that hearing, I encourage all of our staff, don't just talk about the case, spend some time getting to know them as a person and really empowering them and showing them, what a badass you are. And then you're going to file motions, you're going to litigate, you're going to negotiate, you're a great trial attorney. So that you don't want your clients pleading out of fear. You want them, if they do pleading only because they know they have a great trial attorney, but you're advising them that this is the best result in that particular case. So on the front end, that has to be there before we start talking about what the immigration consequences are. Because so many times people, the distinction between someone who has been labeled or convicted of something and someone who hasn't been depends on so many factors other than what the conduct is. So that's the first piece. I'm going to kick it over to Ali on the immigration connection.
Well, yeah, actually, I want to piggyback off of that, because that issue is at the core of what we've seen the patterns of coercion in criminal defense is that systemically putting clients in a position where they're more apt to make fear-based decisions to give up their rights instead of pursuing their rights fully to get their complete day in court. And we see that as public defenders all the time. And in the immigration system, to answer your question about the current moment, we're seeing that really supercharged. I mean, they're going nuclear, right? Because unlike some of the protections that we have in criminal court about your right to a speedy trial and so forth, those rights are not actually afforded in the same way in immigration court, because they have this fiction that that's not a criminal proceeding, that it's civil law. So therefore, you don't get the same suite of due process protections. But what we see is what they're doing is they're putting people in a position to make fear-based decisions in order to just release themselves from custody, right? In immigration detention, people are there indefinitely, right, while they're fighting their case. And sometimes even afterwards, they're in there indefinitely. So without a release date in these terrible conditions, and by the way, most of these people are not in safe facilities. They're in for-profit detention facilities run by really, really shady corporations, Geo Group, Core Civic. And, we've had clients that have suffered tremendous abuses, physical abuse, violence, sexual abuse, lack of medical care, and that's happening on the daily right now. And so these tactics, and we're going to talk about more of these tactics that the federal government is using, are designed to stoke fear and put people in that position. And we as public defenders need to make sure that A, we are not making fear-based decisions, right? That we are not afraid to go to trial or afraid to really get into the client's life with them, because there's an emotional impact, right? People want to defend themselves for that. So I think that is just a really critical thing, is eliminating fear-based decisions, both from your client and from the person providing services and the team, is really critical. And the other thing I'll say, and we'll talk more about different things that are happening, is, this is not a solo thing. This is a team sport, right? Liberation is a team sport. And one of the things that's happening right now in the Bay that I think is really tremendous is unprecedented amounts of collaboration going on between partners that don't always collaborate, right? First of all, across the Bay, all the public defender offices, our immigration units are collaborating around regional rapid response networks. So we have local ones, but we're collaborating together across the Bay. And we're not doing it just as lawyers, right? Lawyers are not the key to our salvation. We're an important piece, I hope, right? But that's not it. It takes people power, right? And that's what we're seeing day in and day out. We're seeing coordination between attorneys, community groups, advocacy groups, and nonprofits to really have a unified response right now. And so as scary as things are, as racist and oppressive as the federal tactics are right now, what's happening is a lot of creativity in the Bay about new ways to collaborate and without fear to have fierce defense for individuals both in criminal court and in immigration court.
So to jump into that, maybe one question might be, okay, let's say you're a student, like how can you participate in this fierce defense?
First of all, in our office, you can go to our website, the Public Defender website. We have a robust internship program. So I want to invite all of you, if you're interested and have some time, to actually do that, including our immigration unit, paralegal, IT, attorney, all these areas. So that's one area. There's also ICE out of California networks where people are accompanying people to ICE check-ins, where we're actually staffing those. In our office, we will defend people. And in Ali's office also in Contra Costa in deportation cases. So that's an area we can tap in with any of our offices. It's really important also that we're aware of where they are, but the people power does work. I mean, we haven't seen, we saw a lot of that before, but then we showed up, we had a press rally on Montgomery Street in San Francisco, and us showing that we're not standing for this. There's been a lot less of that in the subsequent weeks. So people showing up, people protesting, people defending, people advising of rights. That hasn't been a good look in some circles, and I think the federal administration has taken some political hits because of that. So I think as long as we continue to show up and say, like, we're not cool with that, like there's should be some form of due process before you get to yank someone. And what ICE is an attempt to just evade the rule of law, evade due process, and just fast track to deportation.
Two ways that students could get involved. First, I'll start with just kind of a very specific practical one. So they opened up about a year and a half ago a new immigration court in Concord, California. And that's right in Contra Costa's backyard. So we were like, well, not on our watch. We're going to make sure that we're there from day one. So we created a program called the Legal Empowerment Initiative, which basically, instead of just having Attorney of the Day program, which is a component of our Legal Empowerment Initiative, we wanted to make sure that we were providing accompaniment and navigation services for the families that are having to face this system, usually without attorneys. So the Legal Empowerment Initiative has attorneys of the day that can assist people during their first kind of court date in immigration and give them a quick and dirty legal consultation so that they know what's happening, give them resources and so forth. But for students, what we have, which is amazing, is we have 3 different volunteer opportunities. One is called the Welcoming Navigators, so particularly looking for bilingual students who basically are at court as volunteers that can welcome people coming there so that they have a friendly face in this really kind of stressful time, and that they can help the people figure out where to go, that they're in the right place, start taking information to assist the attorneys in being able to help more people. And then also route people to other services. There's a Court Watch volunteer program where you could just go and basically sit in court and watch and kind of take notes and learn about what's going on, and then also collect data for us so we know real time what's happening. And thirdly, there's right now there's a real need for a lot of self-help support. So most people that are in deportation proceedings are asylum seekers. So they're looking for asylum. And in order to get asylum, you have to file a very complex application in English within a year of your entry to the United States. And so there's not enough lawyers to help everybody do that with full representation. So we've created a program called the Community Asylum Support Program. And so you could help people actually fill out their asylum applications themselves with some assistance from you and training and do that. So those are ways to get tapped into some of the existing things. But what I would say is to get involved, you're involved. Like this is happening to all of us, right? Everybody's involved right now. So just organize. You can all be organizers. You can be organizers in your local clubs and your school groups here. You could get organized in your neighborhoods. I think that's really critical, right? When fascism is happening, it's really about separating people from each other and alienation. And so the more you're in community with each other, working together to just do good work, doesn't really matter too much to me what it is. It's just be in community and be involved because this affects all of us.
And I want to piggyback on that court watch idea because a colleague of mine in Santa Clara Public Defender's Office says there's a lot of injustice that happens in empty courtrooms. Mm-hmm. And the more people who are in courtrooms observing and watching, and if there are journalists here or your school paper or whatever you're working on to let people know this is what's actually happening is crucial.
That's so helpful. I guess I'll put in a plug also. There's law students organized a training recently where people came from La Peña. They want to do more of these. And the kind of form this is taking is a group called Sapphire, I think it's called Students and Faculty for Immigrant Rights Education, or I'm not totally sure what the acronym stands for, but I can link people to Sapphire. So it's like a UC. It's actually started at UC Irvine, I think, but hopefully will be a UC-wide thing. But yeah, it's, I think, exactly what we're just so privileged to have you guys here when you're doing this incredible work to talk to us about this. I know there were ICE arrests and immigration courts in Concord, San Francisco. Do you guys want to say a little bit, is there anything more to say about that beyond the importance of people serving as witness and documenting?
Yeah, I want to get to more questions, so I'll be brief about this.
Yeah.
It's happening, and it all goes along with what we were saying before, right? It's about fear. So what they were doing is they were coming in force, in tacked out gear, masks, guns, the whole nine, into the immigration court. And these are people going to court. These are not people trying to evade process. These are people trying to go and have their day in court. And yet ICE would come there in force, and generally just to kind of get one or two people, right? When there's probably 100 people on the calendar. But just by being there at the court, they want to spread fear so that people get afraid to go to court and want to make the decision, maybe I shouldn't go. And what happens is you don't show up to your immigration court date, you just get ordered deported without you even being there. It's called deported in absentia. And so this is part of their tactic to increase deportations and reduce the amount of due process that they need to provide to people. So if they can just scare people into giving up on their asylum claims, then they can just get deportation orders snapped out like that. So that's happening in San Francisco, in Contra Costa, and increasingly it's happening in our criminal courts as well. And so this is a real serious threat to democracy when you have, federal troops inside our places of redress, our judicial systems.
Yeah, and I want to highlight that point of so many of the people that are being picked up are actually trying to show up to court so they can have a judge make a decision on their case. They are not evading process. They're actually trying to get process. And that's often, the hype out there is that, people who are undocumented, they're trying to avoid, people are showing up trying to go to court. And this is interfering with that process.
And so what we do, I do want to say that what we do is we encourage people, because for some people, they have the right to make that choice, right? We're not going to be paternalistic about people's choices about showing up or not showing up. But what we try to do is make sure that we get the word out, that people are still winning their cases, that we are still winning cases on the daily, we're still getting people free frequently, and to encourage people to just get legal advice before they make the decision to come to court or not, so that they can assess the risks for themselves.
That's really helpful. So speaking of all this, as we all know, there's this incredible kind of slippage between being undocumented, being quote unquote illegal, lawbreaker, criminal, right? And we see the administration doing this all the time, even for people who have various kinds of protected statuses. Like I remember in the vice presidential debate, J.D. Vance talking about Haitians in Springfield as illegal when they were in the United States on temporary protected status or parole. But how do you respond to this kind of splitting between criminal and non-criminal, actually by advocates, so not by Trump and Vance, but by advocates who are trying to harness support for people who don't have criminal histories? Because that's something that happens a lot, and I think it's really important to hear from how you two navigate this.
Sure.
I can start if you want.
Yeah, why don't you start?
Okay. Yeah, I think, this has been an issue in the immigrant rights movement for a long time. So this isn't just a legal issue. This is in the immigrant rights movement. One of the traps that happens is, it's an age as old as time, right? It's divide and conquer. It's binary narrative. So it's saying there's good immigrants and bad immigrants. And it's basically a narrative trap to say, well, if we can cast people as bad immigrants, and then if the organizations and the people in the communities that are trying to help immigrants are put in the position then of saying, oh, but this immigrant isn't a bad immigrant. This immigrant doesn't have a criminal record or something like that. So maybe those other immigrants, you can dispose of them, forget them. But this immigrant is a good one, right? So the good immigrant, bad immigrant dichotomy, which is a particular issue for Asian Americans and our white adjacency, right, is a real important thing to call out and be aware of. They use that binary to not only glom on to the racist kind of, dog whistles, I mean, beyond dog whistles at this point, right? The sheer racism underlying this attack on immigrants, which, by the way, like, immigrants are great for the country. They're great in every measure that you could think of. So it's all just a sideshow, but they really rely on this good immigrant, bad immigrant narrative, and then they layer on top of that the history of how criminalizing language especially for non-white people in this country, has been used to allow us to dispose of people. To basically say, oh, well, then that person's disposable, and we don't have to worry about the conditions in these detention facilities. We don't have to worry about the lack of due process. We don't have to worry about what random prison in what random other third country they send somebody to.
Yeah, and that's why I started my comments earlier in terms of talking about the issues of pretrial detention, overcharging, and trial taxing, to say how arbitrary a lot of times this distinction between someone who pled to an offense and someone who didn't, how arbitrary that distinction is. There was a lot of news earlier about the quote-unquote gang member who was being deported, to El Salvador, but was from Venezuela, right. So I have took very seriously in San Francisco of trying to challenge these allegations against our clients of being gang members. The San Francisco Police Department has a very well-oiled gang task force, but they've pretty much labeled almost all black and brown people, particularly around housing projects, as either a member or an associate of a particular gang, like across the board. I mean, I'll go through, and I've been in these long trials that can last 4, 5, 6 months, and everyone, like, what about him? Member? What about him? Associate? I'm like, can you name someone who's not a member of associate in this neighborhood? And they can't, right? I used to have a pickup basketball game at Balboa High School in San Francisco, and there was someone who worked with a lot of youth who would bring people to the game, and he was interested. His brother had been wrongfully convicted by the San Francisco District Attorney's Office and subsequently exonerated. And I told him I'm in this gang case, and he said, we don't have black gangs in San Francisco. And I said, I need you to come to court and say that. And when I was in court, the judge was saying, well, he hasn't gone through this training. He's not qualified as a gang expert. And I said, well, that's fine, because my client's not a gang member. My client's a community member. I'm going to qualify him as a neighborhood community cultural expert. They can call their gang expert. I'll call my community expert, and we'll have the jury decide. And what I found is jurors were really, really hungry for this kind of information. And like, I've walked several clients out the door who are looking at life enhancements for being a gang member, and the jury, when they actually hear that and you break it down, it's nonsense. And this labeling happens so casually by people, and that's why when I early talked about like this village elder who saw my father, like, what we have to do is truly see our clients and see beyond that. Like what it, and they've said, oh, this is an active gang member. I said, well, you're aware this is his goddaughter he's taking care of? Or where he's at college and getting a 4.0 right now? So how much time does this person have to be an active gang member that you've labeled this way when they're doing all this other things in their community and with their family? Similarly, you'll see this label. Okay, I'll just take one example, like Norteño. If you go to San Francisco, you can have 3 people all with the same tattoo that means totally different things. Someone may have that because they're being told by someone in prison to do X, Y, and Z. Now that would maybe more fit the definition, but there's trafficking, there's duress, there's all sorts of defenses to that. Some may be like, I grew up in this part of town, I know red's the color here, I'm not gonna wear blue, but I'm just going about my life. And I think I've seen some tensions here, but I'm just going about my life, and this is a navigation strategy for me. That's why I'm wearing this color. It's not because I'm trying to commit any crimes, it's my community. And that's why, and in fact, this community's been there for me in a lot of ways, where other people haven't for a lot of reasons. And some people may have that same term as a form of pride or cultural pride. So the same word, Norteño, can be 3 very different things in the community. So deconstructing these labels is crucial. When you start deconstructing these labels, then you start deconstructing this notion of good, bad immigrant, criminal, non-criminal. So many of the offenses that people are actually pleading to are literally crimes of poverty. And I've talked to people like who were labeled a Norteño. They said, I did that because I was poor. That's why I was stealing. It had nothing to do with this gang affiliation. The quote unquote gang affiliation is probably the reason I'm alive right now, because it gave me a community. And what I was taking, that's because I was hungry and I had to feed my family, or I was hungry myself, and that's why I was stealing things from the store. So many things are actually crimes that are connected to complex trauma, poverty, addiction, etc., crimes of despair. They're not sophisticated criminal enterprises. So even when someone has technically broken something in the penal code, we have to look deeper at the reasons. The other thing is, what's a really common phenomenon is human trafficking. We actually were able to go to Sacramento and have that change the law so that is a defense, but there are very, very few people who will actually take the stand and talk about that because they have fear of the traffickers and things of that nature. In my office, I elevated someone to management who's amazing, Spanish speaker, family came undocumented from Mexico, but she's incredible at really empowering clients to really tell their story. And we're finding time and time again, when jurors hear about human trafficking, they've returned verdicts of not guilty or hung juries because they're recognizing that's a real defense and this person would not have done that but for the coercion that happened. So again, a lot of the low-level drug dealing, things of that nature, people are actually factually not guilty under the penal code when you look deeper at the law and you actually run the full defenses. Because of all these tactics, though, oftentimes we don't run these defenses in the way we should, and it's really important that we empower defenders and give defenders the resources so we can actually have true just outcomes as opposed to manufactured outcomes due to these coercive forces that prosecutor offices like to use.
Thank you. It's really helpful. So this is what we're going to do. I'm going to ask one more question, and as I ask this, you guys can think about what you might like to ask, and then we'll open it up and we'll basically combine questions. So maybe we'll take 2 questions at a time and then ask our speakers to respond. So my final question for you is about specific impacts on API communities. And so just some statistics. In California, 55% of Asians are immigrants. 1 in 7 Asian immigrants in California is undocumented. And then I'm sorry not to have statistics for other communities, but I found on the Asian Law Caucus website, there are about 1,700 Cambodians, 4,800 nationals of Laos, including Hmong and Mien community members, 8,600 Vietnamese and Montagnard community members who have outstanding removal orders. I'm also thinking about Asian immigrants who have been subjected to third country removal to Costa Rica, Panama, Eswatini. and South Sudan. So if you could say something about particular issues facing the API community.
Yeah, well, it is, it's dire. API immigrants are not immune. Actually, API people that are citizens are not necessarily immune from getting targeted. One of the major issues right now that's happening, unfortunately, is there are a lot of people that came here fleeing violence and war and genocide, particularly in Southeast Asia, that came in the 80s and 90s, and were basically the children were kind of transplanted here and often had it kind of rough coming up, and eventually many of these folks got system involved with the criminal punishment system, maybe had old cases and so forth, but then through the older system of immigration law, they were able to get certain kinds of protections. Particularly the biggest one is protection under something called the Convention Against Torture and other forms of inhuman and degrading punishment. But now what's happening is because the government couldn't send those people back to the country that they were born in, even though those countries, they have no connection to them anymore, right? Most of them don't even speak the language, all of that stuff. But instead what's happening is the government is basically sending people to third countries and sending people to detention in third countries, including places like Eswatini, South Sudan. Like they just canceled temporary protective status for people from South Sudan. I believe partially because they want to justify being able to send, people in immigration detention here in the United States to those places. So this is something that is evolving. Unfortunately, because the immigration judiciary is not independent, it's not actually part of, you guys know there's the executive, the legislative, and the judicial branches of government, right? Well, immigration courts actually aren't in the judicial branch of government. They're under the executive branch, right? Which means who's their boss? Yeah. So what's happening is those systems are completely failing our communities. And in addition to that, the government is, through militaristic invasions of our communities, throwing tons and tons of people into detention. And as part of that entire process, they are demanding that people get not only prove that they can't go back to the country that they're from, but then they have to prove that they would be in danger in these other countries that they've never been to. And they have to do all of this without a lawyer. And the Supreme Court actually made a really terrible decision, another really terrible decision several months ago, basically foreclosing class action lawsuits in many of these cases, where before we could basically cover a whole group of people in order to fight back a tactic that the federal government was using. And ultimately, the Supreme Court came down and said, well, there is redress for this, but you can't do it through class action. Each individual person has to use a mechanism called habeas corpus. So you have to do something called an extraordinary writ, which is like a super fast, super complicated appeal, okay? And they're expecting people in detention, immigrants who don't have law degrees generally, right, without lawyers to file these habeas proceedings. So one of the great challenges we're seeing right now, Leti, is the capacity to do habeas corpus proceedings, because we're winning. We're winning those because those we get to actually go to the judicial branch. We get to go to district federal court. And we're winning a lot of those, but there's so many people that just don't have connection. So I want to end by just saying something that Manohar said was really critical. He talked about budgets, right? He talked about our ability to do this work and the funding that we have not only at public defender offices, but throughout our systems to actually protect people and give them a fighting chance. Our public dollars are our public dollars, right? And how those dollars are spent is a direct reflection of the values of our community. So back to the question before of what you can do, right? You can get involved in budget advocacy in your community right now. Where are the dollars going? Follow the money, and you can do some good work that way.
Yeah, and just for perspective, the amount of money that goes to prosecutors and police, our public defender's office, about 60% of the prosecutor's budget. The police budget is 14 times our budget. So I have 23 investigators, one of them here in this room, investigating against the entire police department. So it's totally inequitable, the amount of money we put into caging prosecutors, sheriff, police, compared to public defenders. Both of us know people who came to this country early in the 70s, 80s, did their time. They're doing amazing community work now, and they're facing deportation to a country that they left when they were a child and barely have any connection to right now. We're trying to work to get them pardons, whatever we can. But when you actually and Brian Stevenson, I don't know if any of you have seen the movie Just Mercy. He talks about changing the narrative, hopefulness, a willingness to be uncomfortable, and lastly, proximity. Again, the vast majority of people who met some people that the government is trying to deport would be like, of course they should stay here if they actually knew them. But once people label them as whatever, bad immigrants or criminals or illegally here, once you throw that label on, and it makes it more difficult. But once you get below that layer and actually get to know the people that the government is trying to detain or deport, it totally changes everything.
Okay. Sorry, go ahead.
I'm so sorry. The last thing, because I know this is an AAPI kind of conversation. I just would be remiss if I didn't say this final thing about this. These narratives on the good immigrant, bad immigrant, we're not criminals kind of language and everything, plays on a lot of the things that we bring from our own cultures, right? And a lot of the bad things that we bring, right? A lot of our cultures and the immigrant rights movement, unfortunately, has a history of anti-blackness, a history of kind of this reflexive, rule of law, rah-rah thing in order to be like, we're not the bad immigrants, right? And so it's really important for us to break through those barriers, to make connections with other groups, right? Other affinity groups, and recognize that we're all in this together, and that as AAPI folks, we need to make sure that we're doing our part with our unique positionality and our community's kind of positionality to work with others to really protect not just our own people, but to protect our entire community, which is diverse and intersectional.
100%.
All right. Okay, I'm going to start to collect questions. Looking around the room. Yes, I see two right here. Okay.
I'm just going to do a quick plug and steal from Manila. I'm the head of the Investigation Unit's intern program, and if you really want to see what American justice looks like, be an intern at the Investigators Unit. You see how it actually operates, and you see how anyone is not as pale as I am or more gets treated. So you'll get an education in how the law actually operates. So if you're interested, contact me.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Stand up.
Fantastic.
Everyone.
Yeah, please.
I'm gonna
Okay.
stand up.
Thank you, Tim.
I'm Manohar Ali. Nice to meet you. My name is Volpp. I'm a student of the journalism school here.
Oh, great.
I'm actually working on a documentary about the LA raids, but focusing on the Iranian community, because a lot of them, as you mentioned, rightly mentioned, that they have faced persecution there and they have come here as seeking asylum, and now they are facing these deportation hearings. And so
my question to you is, quite understandably, they're not open to talk because they're afraid. And I've been reaching out to a lot of people. In your opinion, as public defenders, do you think putting their stories out there, putting faces to the numbers, does it help their case or does it work against them? And if you have any advice for me while I'm working on this mission.
Okay, so hold your thought and let me take another question.
Because I heard through community networks actually that there was an ICE presence outside an elementary school in Oakland this morning, and I was just wondering if any of the PD offices, whether that's Alameda or any of your guys' offices, have resources where people can know about these things soon after they happen, because a lot of it is very decentralized right now. It's really hard for people to kind of know what's going on.
Awesome. Okay.
Yeah, so I did hear about that. I think it's, everybody's on high alert right now. I'm not sure about shutting down the elementary school as a result of kind of not, ICE being in the neighborhood. But at the same time, I think there are rapid response networks throughout the Bay. So familiarize yourself with those rapid response networks. And in order to get that information, I think really tap into either the ICE out of California networks. Bay Resistance actually does a lot of really great work right now with getting people aware and involved. What we do at our rapid response networks is more around the legal response, right? So we're trying to see if somebody's actually taken, we're trying to connect them with legal services as quickly as possible so that they don't get disappeared, and so that then we can try to connect them with habeas resources so we can get them out, if possible, as quickly as possible. And then to answer your question, the documentary sounds fascinating. I think, in terms of sharing the stories, that's a very personal kind of decision for everybody. I will say, however, that in my experience, there's been a rise in participatory defense, which Manohar has been practicing for a long time and described some of it earlier. And we're just kind of starting to do it in the immigration field. And so both sharing your stories with community at large through media and other ways like that, but also just personally with other members of the community that can be there to accompany you, go with you to court, all of that. I think that's a net benefit to people. I think it makes people feel seen. It makes people feel held. And we've seen it be very, very successful. Manohar described kind of how powerful it is when the community shows up. Because a lot of injustice happens when it's just a courtroom and the person that's being subjected to the question at hand. But when you have community there showing their support for somebody, it makes a tremendous difference. So I would say keep doing what you're doing. Make sure to talk not only to people that are going through the system themselves and attorneys, but also to the nonprofits and support groups that are really required to present a whole holistic system of care.
Yeah, I think it's, obviously a personal question for those subjects if they want to be, particularly if the case is pending, whether they want, their situation to be publicized. There might be a way to do it without actually maybe blurring out faces, maybe keeping someone, depending on I don't know what medium you're using, whether it's print journalism or if it's documentary film. There might be ways to get around that, but I think the narrative is absolutely crucial. As I started my comments with, there's an elected prosecutor, there's an elected DA and a sheriff in every county in the state. The head of the California District Attorneys Association just made some really inflammatory and racist social media posts about Zohran Mamdani in New York, and the other DAs haven't condemned that yet, which is really offensive. But it's really important. We actually started a film initiative. It's called We Are Defender. If you go to wearedefender.com, you can see we've already released 3 movies with 2 community-based film production companies. We're actually releasing 3 more at the Roxy in San Francisco on December 2nd, so you can go to their website and come out that night. When one of the
Popcorn,
stories that's going to be highlighted is a client that our immigration unit defended, and he'll be there. Also a client who's allegedly facing gang charges that I defended, he'll be there. We have someone who's also was represented by our youth defender unit who will be there. So getting these narratives out there as much as possible. In fact, we should talk afterwards, because I have this vision of us trying to just pump out these stories and these narratives in much more rapidly, because so many public defenders' offices were so underwater with just the day-to-day work that we don't have the ability to. I've been fortunate being elected. I've slowly been able to build out these other smaller units. I have this Confronting State-Sponsored Violence and Advocating for Community Power Policy unit. My communications is under that unit. I recruited a wonderful attorney named Angela Chan with his help from the Asian Law Caucus to head that unit. So we're trying to do as much of the communication as we can, but we need to collaborate with others to do it more effectively.
Yeah, if you're open to it, I'd love to talk to you.
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay, super. I think we have time for another round. Awesome. We have 2 right behind here.
All right, this is a bit more of a broad question, but what kinds of reforms do you believe need to happen on the mass scale to make it easier for undocumented immigrants to become legal residents, since the process itself is so difficult, especially once you're already in the country?
And our second question.
My question is a little bit more specific. So in the past few months, we've seen that DHS has submitted several motions to reopen previously closed respondents' cases that were closed under previous administrations such as Biden and Obama. I know more about SoCal, but my question specifically is about Bay Area immigrants because it's affecting an array of different types. And how has your personal work tied into this as well?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I'm going to take this.
Yeah.
So on that point, on the more granular specific scale, yes, they are reopening previously administratively closed cases. Again, they are nabbing people both at their check-ins, but also sometimes at their green card interviews. If you go to just your green card interview sometimes and all the paperwork's not perfect, we've seen ICE, again, not all the time, but in order to scare people, they've been doing arrests at USCIS interview places. Again, this all goes back to what we talked about in the beginning, is they want to set a culture of fear so people give up and don't even try to assert their rights. And so we encourage everybody to, before they make a decision about, hiding, fleeing, not showing up, that they get specific advice. And we've seen it very much in our practice. One of the major impacts to the practice is, like I mentioned before, the habeas proceedings. Basically, we're not getting good traction under the Executive Office of Immigration Review, which is what they call the immigration so-called courts. I don't even like to call them courts because they're part of the executive branch. And so we need to go to federal district court. But most immigration attorneys are not even qualified to go to federal district court. So there's this big gap. Not only already do you not have the right to an appointed attorney, but now even the attorneys that you have don't have experience doing habeas. So that's why this intersection between criminal defense and immigration defense is so critical, because we do have experience with habeas, and we're trying to expand that capacity right now. So one of the major things, to kind of go to your question, one thing is we just need more resources for more legal services to be provided to clients. Whether that means we need more money for attorneys so that we could give people more services through our systems that we have, or whether it's a larger kind of reform, like having public defenders basically as a right for people in immigration proceedings, right? If you're in deportation proceedings and they can lock you up indefinitely and they can send you to a terror camp in El Salvador, you should have the right to an attorney under our Constitution. So that's another big piece. But in order to do any of those things, there needs to be political advocacy for the resources to be shifted that way. And in order for us to get the traction to do that, we need to break through these narratives of good immigrant, bad immigrant. We need to break through the BS premise that immigration is somehow bad for our country. And we need to call this out for what it is, which is it is a racist campaign of terror against people of color, including immigrants, being used as the excuse in order to get everybody whipped up right now while they're basically looting and gutting the government.
Hear, hear. Okay. All right. Other questions? Yeah.
Yeah, I'd just be curious, what your typical day looks like in the office or in the courtroom, especially right now, since it's such a heated moment, especially how that dynamic has shifted from say the beginning of the year to maybe at this point in time.
Awesome. And then maybe one more. Anybody? Yes, no, going? Go. Oh, yes, great.
Well, I just wanted to ask because I've definitely been hearing about the third country deportation news, and that just sounds so insane to me. And of course, I don't have the same foundation knowledge because I'm an undergrad, but I just wanted to ask, what is the legal, legislative, or executive basis for these third country deportations? I mean, how do you even reason that to a court? That's my question.
Well, I'll take the first question, you take the
Yeah.
second one. It's intense right now on so many fronts. My immigration unit is suffering. I was able to reach out with the help of this person sitting next to me to some foundations to get some more support for our immigration unit. So I'm going to be able to hire some more attorneys and a paralegal, but still, we're not close to being able to take the number of requests we have for our help in immigration court. And also our district attorney apparently feels really emboldened right now because of some of the perceptions and stereotypes. And we had a progressive prosecutor who was elected in San Francisco, then recalled with a lot of bogus data. But if you show the same loop over and over again, you can change people's perceptions, and people feel like they experienced something that they actually didn't see. They just saw it on the news and they saw it over and over again. They feel like they experienced it. So they're filing all sorts of stuff. Loitering with the intent to commit a drug offense, whatever that means. Unlawful lodging, which is functionally being homeless. I mean, we're seeing so many charges and just a ballooning of cases. So as an attorney, you're in court, you're defending cases, you're going back, you're working on motions to release, you're filing motions to suppress, you're showing up again in the afternoon for other cases. So I actually tell people right now, we really want to encourage people to go into this field, but you have to be built for it. It's not easy, and we don't want people who don't want to put in the work, who aren't passionate about it, because it's not an easy job. It's also extraordinarily rewarding because the impact you can have on people's lives is tremendous, but you have to be built for it, or you have to steel yourself for that. And like I said earlier, that willingness to be uncomfortable is crucial. But it is quite intense right now with the narratives that are out there and the amount of work that there is.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we just got to work harder than them, right? And we do.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
our superpower. We
Right.
outwork them.
And we're smarter.
Yeah. And immigrants, we get the job done, right? To your question about the third country removals, there's a lot of different reasoning that they're using time and time again. So it's just a moving target, right? They're just throwing crud at the wall and making us scramble because they know that most people don't have lawyers. So, you probably heard about that first case when they sent the plane load of Venezuelans to El Salvador. Well, we were actually representing one of the clients that was on that plane. We were lucky enough to work with our lawyers and ACLU to be able to file, a class action as quickly as we could. We were able to get our client and a few other clients off of that plane, literally off the tarmac. And by the time the hearing happened, the judge, you probably saw a story in the paper today if you look in The Guardian, the judge said in the emergency hearing, well, stop this, turn the plane around, this is ridiculous, we got to have a hearing about this. And the government basically just said, nope, and they sent people there. So there's different tactics that they keep changing, and so we're constantly having to litigate, right? Which is what we do, but the problem is they know that even if we win in district court, which we do, we've won on almost every one of these issues. It's highly illegal what they're doing. But we have to go through all these complex processes, and for every client that we save, there's probably 20 others that don't have representation and get scooped. So they use things like the Alien Enemies Act. They use things like right now the big thing is their agreement with Honduras to accept people from the United States from other countries. So they're basically just cutting deals and being like, we'll cut you a check if you take all these people. And so we're having to do a lot of litigation on that. So it's a moving target. It is profoundly unlawful, both in terms of U.S. law under the Constitution, but also under international law. But what we got to do is outwork them.
So I think we're going to call it so that there's a couple minutes if people want to follow up individually, as well as pick up a card if you want to intern in the SFPD. I have to say this was both so informative and unexpectedly incredibly inspiring, and I want to thank both of you for the work you do and the time you took with us tonight. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I'm going to flip to the last slide because we do try to do a lot of community education through Blue Sky, also through Instagram. So we try to put out things at least 2-3 times a week. So please follow follow me, follow the SF Public Defender's Office, you want to tell them what you're...
Nah. Don't follow me, it's dangerous.
But we try to put out information.
All right.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Go Bears.
Go Bears.